Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Life-Changing True Stories today. I bring you a powerful and deeply loving story, asterisk. The morning sun cast golden rays across the modest apartment where Natalie Reed stood before her mirror, nervously adjusting the borrowed blazer that hung slightly loose on her small frame. At 24 years old, she had grown accustomed to living in the shadows. Content with her work at the Riverside Community Center, where she taught art to children from struggling families, her world was simple, filled with crayons and laughter. Far removed from the glittering universe her older sister Monica inhabited. Monica burst into the room, her face pale beneath perfectly applied makeup. She pressed a hand to her forehead dramatically, collapsing onto the bed with a theatrical sigh. The night before, she had attended an exclusive networking party that stretched until dawn. And now she was paying the price for her ambitions. "Natalie, please," Monica groaned, her voice hoarse. "You have to go to this meeting for me. Just drop off these partnership documents and explain that I'm sick. It's at the Cross Hotel headquarters downtown. You'll be in and out in 20 minutes. Natalie's stomach twisted with anxiety. She had never been comfortable in corporate settings, preferring the warmth of her community center to the cold steel of business towers. But Monica's desperate eyes left little room for refusal. They had always been different, these two sisters. Where Monica chased spotlight and success, Natalie sought meaning in quiet moments and genuine connections. "What if they ask questions I can't answer?" Natalie whispered, clutching the leather folder Monica thrust into her hands. Monica waved dismissively. "Just be yourself." "Well, actually try to be a little more confident. Stand up straight. Make eye contact. These people respect assertiveness." An hour later, Natalie found herself standing before a building that seemed to pierce the clouds themselves. The Cross Hotel Corporation Tower gleamed with windows that reflected the entire city back at itself. Security guards in crisp uniforms nodded as she passed through the marble lobby, her worn flats making barely a sound against the polished floor. Everything smelled of expensive cologne and leather. She felt like an intruder in a world built for people far more important than herself. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending into another dimension. When the doors opened, a receptionist with a practiced smile directed her down a hallway lined with contemporary art that probably cost more than Natalie's entire yearly salary. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the heavy oak door marked Julian Cross, Chief Executive Officer. She knocked softly, almost hoping no one would answer. But a deep voice called out, "Come in." Julian Cross stood by the floor-2 ceiling windows, his back to the door, hands clasped behind him as he surveyed his kingdom below. He was younger than Natalie expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair and a posture that spoke of absolute command. When he turned, she noticed his eyes first. A striking shade of gray that seemed to look through people rather than at them. "Miss Carter," he said, moving toward his desk with the fluid confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. "Please, sit." Natalie's voice caught in her throat. He thought she was Monica. He thought she was supposed to be here, supposed to know what to say, supposed to belong. She lowered herself into the chair across from his desk. The folder clutched against her chest like a shield. "I should explain," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not actually supposed to be here. I mean, I am, but I'm not Monica. I'm her sister, Natalie. She's unwell today, and she asked me to bring these documents about the charity partnership." Julian's expression shifted from business-like efficiency to something resembling curiosity. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her cheeks flush. Where he had expected polished presentation, he found awkward honesty. Where he anticipated practiced charm, he discovered genuine nervousness. "You're not what I expected," he said finally, and something in his voice had softened. "Tell me, Natalie, do you always let people send you places you're uncomfortable going?" The question surprised her. She looked up, meeting his eyes for just a moment before glancing away. "Sometimes we go where we're needed, not where we're comfortable. That's what family means, I suppose." Julian stood and walked to the window, gesturing for her to join him. Hesitantly, she rose and approached, keeping a respectful distance. The city sprawled below them, millions of lives intersecting in patterns of chaos and beauty. "I've built an empire," Julian said quietly, his voice carrying a weariness she hadn't expected from someone so successful. "Hotels in 30 countries. my name on buildings across continents. But everyone who walks through that door wants something from me. They rehearse their words, calculate their smiles, measure their authenticity against potential profit.
Oh,
He turned to face her directly. You walked in here terrified, clutching documents for someone else's meeting, and you told me the truth immediately. When was the last time someone in this building did that? Natalie felt her heart beating faster. There was something in his gaze that made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced. Not judged for being too quiet or too simple, but recognized for being exactly who she was. I work with children, she found herself saying, the words tumbling out unexpectedly. At a community center in the old district, they come from homes where there's never enough, where dreams feel like luxuries. But when you give them paper and paint, they create whole worlds. They remind me that beauty doesn't require wealth. It just requires permission to exist. Julian smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face. That's the most honest thing anyone has said in this office in years. They talked for another hour, the business documents forgotten on his desk. He asked about her work, her students, her view of the city from ground level, rather than the 42nd floor. She found herself relaxing, her natural warmth emerging as his questions showed real interest rather than polite obligation. When she finally left, clutching the signed partnership papers Monica needed, Julian stood at his window, watching her cross the plaza below. She moved differently than the people who filled his world, without urgency or pretense, simply existing in the moment. Find out everything about her, he told his assistant. Unable to explain why this quiet woman with paint-stained fingers had awakened. Something in him that years of wealth and success had buried deep, down on the street. Natalie breathed in the familiar air of her neighborhood, her mind replaying every moment of their conversation. She had gone, expecting to feel small in his presence. Instead, for the first time in her life, she had felt truly visible. The following week passed in a strange blur for Natalie. She returned to her routine at the Riverside Community Center, helping 8-year-old Thomas mix the perfect shade of blue for his ocean painting. Listening to little Emma describe the castle she wanted to create. But her thoughts kept drifting back to that office high above the city. 2 gray eyes that had looked at her like she mattered. She told herself it was foolish. Men like Julian Cross didn't think twice about people like her. He probably met hundreds of people every week. She was just a momentary curiosity. A brief interruption in his carefully scheduled life. Then the flowers arrived. Not roses or orchids, the expensive arrangements Monica usually received from her admirers. Instead, a simple bouquet of sunflowers and wildflowers, the kind that grew in community gardens and empty lots. The card read in clean masculine handwriting. For someone who finds beauty where others overlook it, JC. Natalie pressed the card to her chest, her heart doing something complicated and terrifying. Before she could fully process what it meant, her phone rang with an unknown number. Miss Reed, Julian's voice came through, professional yet warm. I hope I'm not disturbing you. I'm organizing a charity gala for underprivileged youth programs. I was hoping you might consult on which organizations would benefit most. Would you be available to meet this week? She should have said no. She should have recognized this for what it clearly was, an excuse to see her again. But the part of her that had spent 24 years being invisible desperately wanted to be seen just a little longer. I could meet you, she said softly. But not at your office. There's a cafe near the center where I work. It's called Rosie's. Very different from what you're used to. Perfect, he replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. Tomorrow at 2? Rosie's Cafe occupied the ground floor of an old brick building, its mismatched chairs and chipped mugs telling stories of decades serving the neighborhood. When Julian walked in the next afternoon, he looked distinctly out of place in his tailored suit, yet he didn't seem uncomfortable. He ordered black coffee and settled across from Natalie at a corner table, its expensive briefcase looking absurd next to the wobbly furniture. This place has character, he said, glancing around at the faded photographs covering the walls. How long have you been coming here? Since I was 16, Natalie replied, wrapping her hands around her tea mug. Rosie gave me my first job, let me work weekends when my family needed extra money. She never made me feel like charity, just family. They talked about youth programs for an hour, but the conversation kept drifting elsewhere. Julian told her about growing up with wealth, but without warmth. Parents who measured success in quarterly reports rather than happiness. She shared stories of her students, of teaching children that their worth wasn't determined by their circumstances. "I'd like to see your center," Julian said suddenly. "Would that be appropriate?" Natalie hesitated, imagining him in the cramped rooms with peeling paint and donated supplies. But something in his expression was genuine, eager even, like a child asking permission for an adventure. "Come tomorrow afternoon," she said. "But fair warning, you'll probably end up covered in finger paint." He laughed, a sound that transformed him from intimidating businessman to someone achingly human. "I'll wear an old shirt." The next day, Julian arrived at the Riverside Community Center in jeans and a simple navy sweater, looking more relaxed than Natalie had ever seen him. The children swarmed him immediately, their curiosity overriding any sense of intimidation. Little Thomas proudly showed him the ocean painting, now complete with dolphins and treasure chests. "It's magnificent," Julian said seriously, crouching to the boy's level. "I used to dream about the ocean when I was your age. Never knew how to paint it, though." "Miss Natalie can teach anyone," Emma piped up. "She says everyone has art inside them, just waiting to come out." Julian glanced at Natalie, who was blushing furiously. "She sounds very wise." As the afternoon unfolded, Natalie watched something remarkable happen. Julian didn't just visit, he participated. He sat at the craft table and attempted a landscape painting under Emma's exacting direction. He listened to Shy Miguel describe his dream of becoming an architect. He laughed when Thomas accidentally splattered green paint across his sweater, declaring it an improvement. When the children finally left with their parents, Julian and Natalie cleaned up in comfortable silence. He washed paintbrushes while she organized supplies, moving around each other with an ease that felt both new and ancient. "Thank you for today," Julian said, drying his hands on a towel. "I can't remember the last time I felt this present, like I was actually living instead of just managing life." Natalie turned to face him, paint smudged on her cheek. "You're different here, less guarded." "I'm different with you," he corrected gently. "You make me want to be the person I was before I learned to armor myself against the world." He reached out, carefully wiping the paint from her face with his thumb. The gesture was tender, intimate, and Natalie's breath caught. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her. But instead, he stepped back, respecting boundaries she hadn't even known she needed. "Would you have dinner with me?" he asked. "Not for business. Just because I'd like to spend more time with you." Before Natalie could answer, the center door burst open. Monica stood there, perfectly styled as always, her expression cold and calculating. She had clearly tracked them down, probably through Julian's assistant or some other connection in her extensive network. "There you are," Monica said brightly, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Natalie, we need to talk. Family matter. Julian, I'm sure you understand." Julian looked between the sisters, sensing tension, but unsure of its source. "Of course, Natalie. Think about dinner. You have my number." After he left, Monica's facade crumbled into fury. "What are you doing?" "Julian Cross was supposed to invest in my startup. I've been cultivating that connection for months, and you've somehow stolen his attention with your little poor girl act." "I didn't steal anything," Natalie protested, hurt blooming in her chest. "He asked me to consult on his charity work. That's all." "Don't be naive," Monica snapped. "Men like Julian don't befriend women like you unless they want something. And when he gets bored, and he will, you'll be heartbroken while I've lost a crucial business contact. Stay away from him, Natalie. You don't belong in his world, and deep down, you know it." The words struck harder because part of Natalie feared they were true. That night, alone in her small apartment, she looked at her reflection and saw what Monica saw. Someone ordinary, unremarkable, easy to overlook. Why would someone like Julian, who could have anyone, choose someone like her? When he called the next day, she let it go to voicemail. And the day after, his text messages went unanswered. She threw herself into work, staying late at the center, avoiding anywhere she might accidentally encounter him. But Julian wasn't a man accustomed to giving up. A week later, he appeared at the community center, just as Natalie was locking up for the evening. He looked tired, frustrated, and more human than she had ever seen him. "Why are you running from me?" he demanded, his voice rough with emotion. "Did I do something wrong? Say something that upset you?" Natalie couldn't meet his eyes. "You didn't do anything? I just think we got caught up in something that doesn't make sense. You have your world, I have mine. They don't overlap. They overlapped just fine last week, Julian said, stepping closer. What changed? Reality, she whispered. You're Julian Cross. You own hotels in 30 countries. You attend galas and board meetings. I teach art to kids who can't afford proper supplies. Monica was right. I don't belong in your life, Monica said that. Understanding dawned in Julian's expression, followed by anger. She's jealous, Natalie. Can't you see that? She's angry because for once someone chose substance over surface. He took her hands gently, his touch warm and steady. I've spent my entire adult life surrounded by people who want me for what I have, not who I am. You're the first person who looked at me and saw beyond the money and the power. You saw someone worth talking to? Someone worth knowing? Don't let your sister's insecurity destroy something real. Tears slipped down Natalie's cheeks. What if I'm not enough? What if 6 months from now you realize I can't navigate your world? That I embarrass you at fancy dinners? Or bore you with my simple life? Then we'll eat at Rosie's instead of fancy restaurants, Julian said, wiping her tears with his thumbs. And you could never bore me. You make me feel alive again, Natalie. Like the world has color instead of just gray contracts and profit margins. Please, give us a chance. Let me prove that this is real. Natalie looked into his eyes and saw the truth there, raw and vulnerable. He was scared too, she realized. Scared of rejection, scared of loss, scared of putting his heart on the line. They were both standing on the edge of something terrifying and beautiful. Okay, she breathed. One chance. He smiled, brilliant and relieved, and this time when he leaned in, she didn't pull away. The kiss was gentle, sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they finally parted, the city lights had begun to twinkle around them, making the ordinary street look almost magical. 3 months passed like a dream Natalie kept expecting to wake from. Julian became a fixture in her life, adapting to her world with surprising ease. He showed up at the community center every Thursday to help with art classes. His expensive watches replaced with paint-splattered ones. They spent weekends exploring parts of the city neither had truly seen before, finding beauty in farmers' markets and street performances, but their relationship existed in a careful bubble, separated from the reality of Julian's business obligations and social circle. He hadn't introduced her to his board members or brought her to company events. Part of Natalie appreciated the privacy, but another part worried it meant he was ashamed of her. Monica, meanwhile, had grown increasingly bitter. She moved out of their shared apartment, accepting a job in another city with barely a goodbye. Their mother called occasionally, confusion in her voice as she tried to understand how her quiet daughter had captured the attention of someone so far above their station. The breaking point came on a cold December evening. Natalie was at her apartment preparing lesson plans when her phone exploded with notifications. Someone had leaked photos of her and Julian to a gossip website. The headlines were cruel. Billionaire's mystery woman from community center to high society. And Julian Cross, trading down? Girlfriend's modest background raises eyebrows. The comments were worse. People questioned her motives, called her a gold digger, suggested she had trapped him somehow. They picked apart her appearance in the photos, her simple clothes, her lack of sophistication. Each word felt like a knife, confirming every fear Monica had planted in her mind. Julian called immediately, but Natalie couldn't answer. She stared at the photos showing their private moments turned into public spectacle, feeling exposed and humiliated. In the pictures, the contrast between them was stark. He looked like he belonged in magazines. She looked like someone playing dress-up in a life too big for her. That night, she made a decision. She would end things before the inevitable happened, before Julian realized his mistake and broke her heart more thoroughly. It was better to walk away with dignity than be discarded later. She texted him, "We need to talk. Tomorrow at Rosie's." Julian arrived early, his face drawn with worry. He slid into the seat across from her, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. "I can't do this anymore," Natalie said, her voice steady despite her breaking heart. "Those articles, the comments, they're right. We don't make sense together. You need someone who can stand beside you at galas without people whispering. Someone confident and polished. Someone from your world." "I need you," Julian said fiercely. I don't care what strangers on the internet think. Neither should you. But I do care, Natalie replied, tears threatening. Every time we're together in public, I worry I'm saying the wrong thing. Wearing the wrong clothes, embarrassing you somehow. I'm exhausted trying to be someone I'm not. I never asked you to be anyone else, Julian said, his voice cracking with emotion. From the first moment you walked into my office, terrified and honest, that's who I fell for. Not some polished version. You, Natalie. The woman who finds beauty in finger paintings and believes everyone deserves kindness. The woman who taught me that success means nothing if you've lost your humanity along the way. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You know what? I'm tired of hiding what we have. I'm tired of protecting you from a world that doesn't deserve to judge you. If you want to end this because you don't love me, fine. But don't end it because you're scared of what people think. He pulled out his phone and opened his social media, which Natalie knew he rarely used. His fingers flew across the screen as he typed, then showed her what he had written, to everyone speculating about my personal life. I'm in love with an extraordinary woman named Natalie Reed. She teaches art to children, believes in second chances, and reminds me daily what actually matters in life. She's not from my business world, and that's exactly why she's perfect. If you have a problem with that, you have a problem with me. And I don't do business with people who can't recognize true value when they see it. Before Natalie could stop him, he posted it. Within seconds, notifications began flooding in. What did you do? Natalie whispered, shocked. I chose you, Julian said simply. Publicly. Permanently. No more hiding. No more treating what we have like it's something to be ashamed of. Natalie stared at him, this powerful man who had just risked his carefully cultivated image for her. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they were different. Not tears of fear or inadequacy, but of overwhelming emotion. I love you, she said, the words tumbling out. I've been so scared of saying it because I thought you'd realize you could do better. But I love you, Julian. You've made me believe I deserve to take up space in the world. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was precious, unbreakable, and strong all at once. You've always deserved that. I just helped you see what was already true. The months that followed weren't perfect. Some of Julian's business associates were dismissive. Certain society circles remained closed to them, but others surprised them with support. Julian's investors cared about profit margins, not pedigrees. And slowly, Natalie began to understand that the people whose opinions mattered didn't judge her for where she came from. She also learned to own her worth. When a prominent magazine wanted to interview her about dating Julian, she agreed, but on her terms. She talked about her work at the community center, the importance of arts education, the beauty of building bridges between different worlds. The article went viral, sparking conversations about class, love, and what really defines someone's value. Julian, meanwhile, began shifting his business focus. He invested heavily in community programs, opened affordable housing initiatives, used his platform for causes beyond profit. Natalie hadn't changed him, exactly. She had reminded him of who he wanted to be. 1 year after that first mistaken meeting, Julian took Natalie back to his office, the place where their story began. The city sparkled below them, full of lives intersecting in patterns of chaos and beauty. I've been thinking, Julian said, pulling a small box from his pocket. About that day you walked in here, terrified and honest. You said people sometimes go where they're needed, not where they're comfortable. You came here that day for your sister, but I think maybe you came here for both of us. He opened the box, revealing a simple ring, elegant without being ostentatious. I need you, Natalie. Not to complete me, because you've taught me I was already whole, but to share this beautiful, complicated life with. Will you marry me? Natalie looked at the man before her, no longer seeing the intimidating billionaire, but the person beneath. Someone kind and searching and real. Someone who had seen past her quiet exterior to the strength underneath. Yes, she said, laughing through tears. Yes, absolutely yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Natalie thought about the girl she had been a year ago, convinced she was meant to live in shadows. She thought about all the ways fear had kept her small, and all the ways love had helped her grow. Their wedding. 6 months later was unlike any society event Julian's world expected. They married at the Riverside Community Center, surrounded by children who had become their chosen family. Rosie catered with her famous coffee and homemade pastries. Monica even attended her apology, awkward but genuine. Finally understanding that love didn't follow the rules she had tried to write in his vows, Julian said, "You taught me that the richest life isn't measured in buildings or bank accounts, but in moments of genuine connection. You are my greatest treasure," in hers. Natalie said, "You taught me that I was never too small or too simple. I was just waiting for someone who knew how to truly see. You are my home." They built a life that defied categories, splitting time between Julian's penthouses and Natalie's community work. They taught art classes together, traveled to his hotels, and brought back stories for the children. They created a foundation that funded youth programs across the country, ensuring kids like Thomas and Emma had every chance to discover their worth. Years later, when people asked how they made it work, Natalie always smiled and said the same thing. "We stopped trying to fit into each other's worlds and built a new one together." And Julian would add, "Best mistake that ever happened to me." Because sometimes the greatest love stories begin with wrong turns and mistaken identities. Sometimes they begin with someone being brave enough to say yes when they want to say no. And sometimes they begin with two people realizing that belonging isn't about matching someone else's world. It's about creating a space where both hearts can finally rest. In the end, the shy sister who was sent by mistake became exactly where she was meant to be. And the billionaire who only had eyes for her learned that real wealth was measured in love, not ledgers. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that the best adventures often begin when we step outside our comfort zones, that true connection transcends circumstance, and that sometimes the person who seems all wrong turns out to be absolutely perfect. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more and meaningful stories.